Good afternoon, everybody, and I always note the danger of being the last presentation before drinks, so I'll try to keep it interesting and to the point. It was fascinating listening to the last presentation by Andrew, and I think there's an enormous amount of discussion that we should be having around how we better use commercial entities, contractors and entrepreneurship, both during and post conflicts and missions that we would have. What I'd like to cover out today for you is a little bit of an introduction, bit of a background to service provider support to the ADF, models of engagement, potential input into doctrine for discussion, 5 ideas for reform. I was chatting to Tom leading up to this and he told me 3, but I couldn't cut it down from 5, so we'll go to 5. And then a conclusion. I do think, though, in the context of when we talk about service providers and how service providers can better be used, it's fascinating. I've spent the last sort of almost 24 hours immersed in the budget and discussions about what it means for defence and the broader Australian economy. And there's a staggering amount around the manufacturing industry, 3,500 jobs, and what it means, a 40-year program and 54 seagoing vessels, and nothing around the service industries. Service industries is the largest single export by sector for the Australian government. For Australia as a nation. It is about half of our budget that's used from a defence point of view, and yet it rates very, very poorly. And in actual fact, as part of the discussion I had with people leading up to it, there's quite a jaundiced view of the use of contractors within defence. So I would like to try to take that view and take some of those points as we go through today. So very long history of private contractors successfully supporting the military, especially when deployed in military ops. In recent ops, private contractors provided the ADF with sustainable, high-quality, value-for-money capabilities such as health services, maintenance and complex air operations. An example of this, and a lot of the examples I'll refer to from my own company, of this premise is the Regional Assistance Mission to the Solomon Islands, RAMSI, where Aspen deployed over 12 years ago with initially the ADF and then later the AFP to provide primary care, tertiary care and aeromedical evacuation operations. And that included everything: the buildings, the equipment, the people, the pharmaceuticals, consumables, ambulance, the lot. And so that was the first time the ADF had done that. And in actual fact, for defence forces around the world, it was one of the first that had ever been done for a defence force. But if we look at some of the background, the inclusion of civil military cooperation teams, the CIMIC teams, has become a normal part of force planning and construction. These teams advise commanders on how to cooperate with civil agencies and companies in support of an objective or a broader mission. Teams include contract management functions and personnel. And this renaissance in how contractors were engaged in this formalised function was driven by a range of factors, including the military has had to start to pay over and above market rates for a long time to attract the sort of high-quality volunteers needed in a professional military for areas of very, very high specialisation. High pay rates in various professions have made it difficult to attract, develop and retain high-quality professionals, such as orthopaedic trauma surgeons, for example, who have to gain professional experience in civilian employment so that they can deploy them into a military context when required. Increasing levels and technological complexity and mass market rollout of that technology means that there's very often greater expertise in the civil sector than in the military, which was previously the case. And for a small example, we have a unit called a life pack, which goes out with our paramedics and used to do infusions, check on patients, a whole range of stuff. we were talking to the military about their acquisition, and they said, we're almost ready to acquire LifePak 12s. We said, fantastic, they're actually no longer sustained. They're now LifePak 20s, and LifePak 12s are now actually being taken off the shelves and replaced with LifePak 20s. And the procurement cycle, which is normal and quite appropriate for large complex bits of kit, for small high-tech turnover bits of kit within particularly the health sector, maintenance or even aviation sectors, it does not suit the churn that can happen within those sectors. The other final area is outsourcing of low skills tasks to reduce Army maintenance costs, for example, in peacetime, to focus on military on-core business and to remove some of the less attractive aspects of military employment is another area to use contractors. Contractors have helped reduce military costs while increasing the number of professionals available. It's also enabled the military to contract in highly specialised knowledge that's up to date for the very specific period of time required. They provided flexibility to deploy contractors who can more easily recruit and then lay off people than the military. Controversially so, the government has little, if any, ongoing obligation to provide veteran support services for contractors when they return home, particularly if they've been in high-tempo environments. In general, the modern military contractor is often desirable in providing those two key types of services. Low or semi-skilled services like catering or cleaning, which are expensive to maintain during peacetime, and highly qualified personnel that are expensive to maintain, as well as needing to maintain experience in civil workforces. So Aspen's experience is predominantly within the latter group, providing services that are both prime and as a subcontractor. Some examples of this support include provision of the services to Ramsay that I mentioned. We did this initially as a subcontractor and then as a direct contractor to government. Provision of clinical workforces embedded within the UK military hospital, working with UK military health professionals in Helmand Province in Afghanistan. Directly contracted to provide care in the battlefield casualty training in the UAE for all Australian military personnel deployed into theatres of operation in Iraq and Afghanistan. We worked directly with the local military commander as part of that training. But what was interesting was that the UAE military, who were also deploying, found the training of the ADF personnel of such a standard that they subsequently have engaged us to provide all of their combat lifesaver training to all operational forces and all new recruits. 10,000 last year, 15,000 this year. In East Timor, that I heard Andrew refer to, we were a prime contractor providing full surgical, medical and dental capability to support the ADF, including management, workforce, facilities, medical transport and provision of consumables. And in Africa, we've worked alongside the UK MOD and the US DOD, delivering the Ebola response for the Australian, the UK and the US governments across Sierra Leone and Liberia, operating 7 Ebola treatment sites concurrently. It's worthy of note we were the only commercial organisation, in actual fact the only organisation, contracted by 3 separate countries to deliver their Ebola response. So what are some of the models of engagement that have been used? There are several models used, be they directly through a direct contract or as a prime contractor, who might manage several disparate service providers, be they health, food, aviation, maintenance, etc. So prime contractors have a global reach and are efficient and use a network of specialist subcontractors to ensure quality through their contracts without the military having to be involved in the day-to-day service delivery, management, personnel issue or contract management. However, subcontractors may not be aware of the demands and pressures on command and hence may not fully appreciate the commander's wishes, desires or long-term intent. Sometimes conflicts can arise between the prime and subcontracted services that they do not wish to highlight to the military contracting agency. An example for us is that a prime is contracted to do both catering and healthcare. And there's a problem with food quality found out as part of the food testing by the health provider and environmental health assessment. It's not in the interests of the prime to pass those comments on to the ADF contracting agent, and a conflict of interest can exist. Subcontracted delivery can be difficult because access and command and the ability to obtain operational context can be difficult to relay down through the chain of command to a subcontractor, depending on the maturity of the prime. A successful prime understands the commercial reality of the situation and will usually allow a sub to focus on their key area of expertise, often facilitating operational delivery sessions of interaction between military and subcontractors. This would require very open, honest and transparent discussions where prime, sub and service providers and the ADF would jointly meet to discuss, review operational requirements today and going forward. An alternative option is where a small contractor provides services directly to a military commander. For example, contractors who maintain drone platforms and systems were housed with and reported directly to commanders and units they were supporting in Afghanistan. This approach has the best of both worlds. The team understands the operational context and has a relationship with the commanders, personnel and teams being supported. However, this approach imposes a support demand on military commanders to logistically support those contracts, be across their contractual requirements and understand how they best want to use them in a mission and operational context going forward. The AFP decided to follow this model in the Solomon Islands, where they split aviation, logistics and health into 3 separate contracts to provide greater control, greater transparency and reduce costs. Now, the military, when on deployment overseas, will often use the train, advise and assist model as a clear role for the missions they are undertaking. However, it's usually focused on security and military roles of the country that they're operating in. Even when the conduct of train, advise and assist activities are in the vast majority the roles of the ADF members themselves, they may miss out on a range of opportunities that actually go to the very points that were just made about expanding that network to support the local economy that will support those security, military and police actions going forward. The areas that typically support defence missions, such as health, including health delivery, health standards, medical equipment and environmental health services, catering, maintenance and aviation operations, are very often ignored as part of this train, advise and assist models. Contractors, especially those conducting those support services within country, are rarely, if ever, engaged as part of that train, advise and assist model within an Australian context. And yet they are incredibly well placed to support such a mission. They understand the country they're now operating in, they understand the cultural context that they're working in, and they understand the relevant service capabilities that are required and typically the capabilities and capacity that exist within the specific country. Most importantly, they're there already. They don't have to be brought in. They don't have to be engaged separately. They are in country with significant capability and often incredibly ready to help. Use of private contractors would provide an option for a long-term legacy with networks spanning the countries and cultures long after the ADF has returned home. For example, the UK MOD worked with Aspen to ensure that a handover of international infection control procedures and networks into the Sierra Leone Health Service was conducted after the conclusion and the shutdown of the Ebola outbreak and treatment response facility in multiple sites across Sierra Leone. The US government, including the DoD, has seen the benefit of training delivery within the health sector to ensure a legacy of service connection in countries such as Somalia, where we were engaged to conduct training of the local military in medical services and delivery in a challenging, aggressive and very austere environment. Service providers have demonstrated that they will go outside or beyond their contracts to deliver service growth and support in the local community. This engagement is usually driven by a number of reasons. From an understanding of the local services equivalent professionals, in our case, the medical professionals, an awareness of the issues facing the local economy and the local people, and a case of wanting to leave a legacy behind them, in a model similar to what motivates and drives the ADF servicemen and women as they are there on that mission. Examples of what we have done to deliver under various contracts around the world to work with locals and contribute towards peace and prosperity includes, for example, growing local businesses. In a specific case in the Solomon Islands, we took all of our environmental health technicians who we had used over a number of years to deliver services for the ADF and then the AFP, to help them set up their own business. We helped them structure their own company. We engaged them as a direct subcontractor for the delivery of the service, and then we went out and helped them market their service so that when we withdrew, they would actually have a viable and sustainable business to grow once Ramsay is complete. We've conducted training to increase standards in the medical community, such as pharmaceutical, ambulance and nursing standards. We've introduced international networks of professionalism and association bodies into countries such as Timor and Africa, linking them up with doctors' networks back here in Australia. We've done food testing across all local food venues that were requested us to come and test so that we could improve local standards, therefore reducing the demand for in-wire catering and increasing the customer base for those approved venues. All of these activities were conducted either by ourselves or other service providers at our own cost and our own volition. They offer examples of what could be achieved by the ADF as part of its peace and prosperity missions by capitalising on this benefit through a jointly agreed and targeted approach. So if we were to look at what the evolving military doctrine around this area and how it could be shaped around the service industries that already support you on deployment, we'd propose a few points for consideration. The ADF should consider developing a plan of going into a deployment with the use of its service providers that will be supporting them, but not only for their own forces, but as an influencer into the local community that will support and reinforce the ADF's mission. Once a deployment has occurred and troops are on the ground, the ADF and the service providers jointly should review the local environment and test the assumptions they made before deployment and adjust the plan as required and then implement. Then, as local conditions hopefully improve, the ADF and the service contractors review, amend the plan as required, and then, where possible, withdraw those services and start using locally developed services in support of the ADF mission. And defence contracting should make this sort of support a part of the contract, perhaps even asking the service provider to develop draft legacy plans as part of their submissions. This would bring new and innovative ideas into this area and still allow the ADF to review, amend, control and accept any of those plans to suit their outcomes and change them as the operational context changes as well. Service providers, I can tell you, will genuinely welcome this because they will see the benefit to the local environment they are working in. They will see that their contribution to the mission goes well beyond just serving the ADF members that are inside the wire, but they will see that that service goes well beyond the wire into that local community, and they will see that they are delivering a legacy to a country that has obviously and genuinely needed Australian government support and intervention in the first place. A range of items that could be considered as part of those legacy plans could include, which is another item we do, initially repair of local medical equipment across medical facilities, but then training in maintenance procedures so they can repair and maintain their own equipment. Training courses, establishment of professional organisations and associations and linking them with the Australian equivalent, be they the College of GPs or the Royal College of Nursing in our state. Charity organisations set up to benefit local grassroots activities. I think of a particular case of a charity that was set up in the Solomon Islands by one of our doctors who noticed that, and this goes again to Andrew's point, that there was a distinct lack of girls making it through high school in Solomon Island schools, because the girls would be kept out to look after home, the boys would be going through school, and the girls would miss out on the education. So 2 of our staff decided to start a charity specifically to sponsor girls into school. And their hope was to be able to sponsor 10 girls a year through high school. That charity last year put 400 girls through high school in the Solomon Islands as a direct start of those staff travelling there and Aspen supporting the creation of the charity and promulgating it across our staff. Nearly all of the funds raised come from Aspen staff who have been deployed to the Solomons over the last 12 years. And then there are opportunities for local businesses, such as environmental health business that I've mentioned previously. So what are our suggestions for potential reforms? We would seek to suggest 5 potential reforms the ADF could consider in regards to the use of service providers in deployments. Establish a basis of trust with service providers through strong, open, transparent communications. There seems to be, as Andrew mentioned, a general distrust towards contractors. I'm half military on my mother's side. I served in the military for 15 years. It is something that all of us who are ex-military get out into business want to be able to contribute back. And so a lot of us really want to contribute as we move on into our next lives. So open forums between contractors, primes and subs, and defence, both the operational side and the contracting sides, whilst ensuring the ADF always holds the responsibility for decisions. Secondly, plan together for agreed outcomes, not just inputs. Let's chase outcomes that will be greater than the provision of straight services in support of the military forces deployed there. The best innovation comes when we work together, rather than telling service providers what to do and what structure and strictures they have around them. You run the risk of dumbing down the contractor capability or destroying their interest in improving efficiency or outcomes. Next, conduct formal lessons learnt sessions with service providers. These could influence mission structure, outcomes, local engagement and deployment capabilities. Now, I'd like to stress, typically we wait for lessons learnt until we're all home, dusted and the vehicles are washed. I think we should be doing a range of lessons learnt activities. We should do a lessons learnt after we do an emergency deployment. We should do a lessons learnt when it's business as usual. We should do a lessons learnt as things start to grow and develop and organisations change. And then we should do a lessons learnt when we come home. Because those lessons should shape how we move forward. Then finally, grow local to use global. By this I mean that service provider capabilities that we grow here in Australia can be utilised to support the ADF during deployment missions. We spoke about this issue of how do we engage, where is the right line. If we're not careful, then when you do a large deployment offshore, you don't have an Indigenous capability you can draw upon to support you. And we end up having to call on a US, a UK or a European force to be able to support us. So I would recognise that the benefits of developing a national capability here and how we use it to support us should be something that we consider. So in conclusion, the use of contractors, particularly service providers, will not decrease as time marches on. If we plan on being the innovative nation, we need to draw on that innovation and agility from everybody involved in missions, not just the ADF, but all the service providers who are looking, watching and learning every single day on deployments, and they can be used to best effect to support the ADF. The Australian defence industries can be a fundamental input to the capability of Australia and to deployments and to ensure the long-term sustainability of where we operate. I'm very happy to take any questions. Who'd like to go first? everybody can hear those wine glasses and canapes out there. That's the trouble.
Or perhaps someone who's had an experience of working with a contractor who would say that it's been relevant to their experience of the trained advisor system. Brett.
I'll start. Hey Glenn, thanks very much for your presentation. There are many elements of it that resonated with me, both in terms of things we've seen in the past and things we perhaps should do in the future. I'm going to take a slight step sideways, so it won't be specifically about service provision or even the medical environment, but from the point of view of Indigenous capacity development and the perspective that defence and government generally want to limit their profile, whether that be in time or size. There is an argument for the superimposition of contractors from start to finish, and I think you talked to that point. If I reflect on the UAE model, which you've also referred to, where actually their whole bureaucracy and indeed their defence force and other organisations are supported by an expatriate or contractor-based infrastructure, I could make an argument that wherever we go in the world, we should be also using some sort of variation on that theme, and indeed we might reflect on it a little bit more tomorrow. My question to you is, do you see that there could be a situation where you are blended as an advisor, say alongside a military advisor, whether it be providing a service or support, train, assist, advise? And indeed, as the military advisors get phased out, could you contemplate being left behind to maintain the rage, so to speak?
Look, I think that's entirely the case. It's certainly possible. I think there's a degree of maturity that we haven't got yet to see that happen. That would actually have to go to that open trust forum that I sort of highlighted in there. I think for the vast majority of contractors, they're in this work because they actually see a real benefit out of what they're delivering. Trying to manage service delivery in Africa or PNG or Solomons or Timor, trust me, is significantly more difficult than managing in other sites that we have elsewhere around the world. But it is good work, and it's the core of where a lot of us have come from. I think if you were going to do that, and I think we'd be excited about that opportunity that scenario outlined then, you would still want to, you as a military would still want to have that control over it and that oversight in a way. And so you would want to put in place the mechanisms that would give you the degree of comfort that you were getting, we were delivering the outcomes that you wanted on your behalf as your agent. So I would see us as a steward of the Defence Force in that role. How we manage that stewardship goes back to stewardship questions for centuries, but it's ensuring that we are constantly aligned with what your goals are and not forgetting that your goals will change over time. How do we keep that up to date? How do we ensure that the nuance that's going on while you're sitting in Canberra is being reflected adequately in, Papua New Guinea or Solomons or Afghanistan? Those elements are really, really critical, and I think that's something that perhaps we haven't developed a mechanism around, and I would want us to trial those mechanisms and learn from them as part of those lessons learned to see what works and doesn't work. I can tell you, it doesn't just need to be between civil and military. I know that when we took over the care under the battlefield training course, we had two clear masters we had to respond to, that we responded to writing in the tender. One was that I had JLC very clearly saying how they wanted the contract to be delivered, and then we had an enormous number of our staff who had been through that operational context. There was a completely different view what they wanted delivered on the ground to what the contract authority wanted. So what we were managing was, well, how do I make sure that the warfighters going in are going to get the very, very best training they need to make sure they're going to survive an ID, while making sure that JLC felt comfortable that the contractual mechanisms were right. Our view was that they actually wanted two very different contract methodologies, two delivery methodologies very different. What we had to do was give the operators what they wanted while making sure that JLC felt comfortable in what that delivery was. So we can act as that translator, and honestly it doesn't need to be a military force and a civilian force. Two military forces can have that disconnect too. It's that communication that's really critical.
Perhaps a final question for the day. Richard.
Can Can I just ask a question about what you think of the legal status of contractors deployed? Whether your contractors rely, for example, on the status of forces agreements organised from government to government, and you operate within that, or whether your individual contractors are quite content to operate within the local laws and in penal systems that might be applicable in the country in which they're operating?
I'll be honest in that all of the deployments we've had, every single one of them is different. And so in some cases, we've been told there is a status of forces agreement and you're covered under it, so live within these rules. And halfway through that deployment, and this is over a number of years, they've said you are no longer covered under that status of forces agreement and you're on your Todd. Go away and sort out how you will now manage on your own. Now, what we did was go away and said, we can do this if you wish. Here are the implications of that. Now, it's going to drive up costs because our insurances went up significantly, and what they ended up doing was bringing us back under the status of forces agreement, because in actual fact, the cost implication for them was enormous for something that really didn't cost them anything to move us back. I can tell you there was a contract we looked at with the UK MOD where the status of forces agreement was so complex and so challenging and had been in place for quite a number of years that we ended up not bidding on that work because it was just too complex to take. In other work, we're very, very clear that our people are subject to local rules and are subject to the local judiciary and the policing arrangements, and we have very clear codes of conduct around that. So what we do is normally set a bar that's higher than the local arrangement, and we have taken people home deliberately, rather if we could see that they've breached that code of conduct, because the last thing I want to do is be going and seeing my military or contractual commander and saying, got a guy in jail, wondering if you could help us out. And so what we try to do is, it's a detailed risk management methodology around each one, and some of them will enable us to develop methodologies, and some of us mean we won't pursue them.
Please join with me in thanking Glenn.